are getting to the last little leg of our session. So the next panel is called Scaled AI, Delivering on the Hype of AI. And for that panel, we have our moderator as Rishi Behari, who is the Associate Director of the Master of Management in AI program at Queen's Smith School of Business. And also our four other speakers that are going to be on this panel are Pavel Abdur-Rahman, who is a partner and head of data science at IBM. We also have Sami, Ahmed, who is VP head of data analytics and AI transformation at BMO. We also have Talasila, who is a data science lead at Shopify, and Eric Bogart, VP Advanced Analytics at ACOSTA. So without further ado, we welcome our moderators and panel speakers. Woo.
All right. This is going to be fun. Keep the energy going from what Achille had before us. Not too many surprises this time, although I think we calling in? We have Elon and Keanu on the phone? No? Okay. Sorry, the 5G didn't work, so we'll stick with the experts that we have here. And speaking of surprises, I've had a chance to moderate a few panels in my day. This is the first time the panelists have ever sent me a grid right here with who's speaking in what order on which points. So if we deviate from it, we'll be coming back to the holy grid to keep things well structured. That being said, I think I liked Achilles' idea that if you do have a question, well, we're going to have some time at the end for questions as well. But put up your hand, we'll get you a mic, and we'll get your question in, and then we'll come back to the grid eventually, and then have time for questions at the end as well. So to get going, we're going to do something a little bit different because I want you to have an idea of the backgrounds of each of these people, not just their name and their position, but how they got to where they are now. And so Achille had a fun fact. So I think all the speakers here, this is my first small surprise, but I think everyone had to send a quote in that they wanted to put on some of the marketing materials. So we'll go down the line, and why don't you start with your quote that you gave for the conference. You can maybe say why you chose that, and then tell us a little bit about your career journey, how you ended up on this panel. So we'll start over here with Pavel.
Awesome. Thank you, Rishi. First of all, thanks for inviting me back. I do want to start by thanking all the organizers. Believe it or not, they're all volunteers. And nobody's an event manager here. So I wanted to thank all the organizers for all the hard work that they're doing. Really, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. The quote that I provided was around, if data is truly an enterprise asset, why is it not in our financial statements? And it's intended to create some reaction because getting things on financial statement is not that simple. And I think there's enough momentum in the organizations, in the policy world, as well as accounting principles, as well as both providers and industry partners towards that goal, which I think perhaps 5 to 7 years away. But then we will really take data seriously because we'll put it as a tangible asset on a financial statement. I've been fortunate to go to school in University of Toronto, did my engineering there, joined IBM as a new graduate consultant, grew up in the firm, and then I did my master's at Smith for the MMA program.
Woo.
Yeah, proud alumni of Smith. I thought, to make the most of my 2 minutes on my introduction and perhaps useful for some of the listeners on career. As a management consultant, we all have frameworks, so I have to share with you my first triangle. I have 2 triangles for you today. This is my first triangle. This is how I think of career, and this is how I've been thinking of a career, and hopefully they'll be useful for you. So if you think about a triangle, at the top of the triangle is what we want to do in our career, right? We also want to get paid a lot of money. We also want to have work-life balance. And oftentimes, when I interact with folks, they're talking about that top part of the triangle, which is cool, one of the 3 factors. But then there's a second corner of that triangle, which is which organization do you work for, and what are they known in the world for? right? Because that's also important, right? For me, being at IBM, it's in the space of AI and cloud and technology. That's our space. And the third part of the triangle is how's the market doing and what is the market buying? And just like any problem, it would have been very easy if those three things stayed static. The reality is all three corners of that triangle is constantly changing. So we want to be at the middle of that triangle so we can actually do what we want to do, work at the companies that we want to work for, while probably get it compensated the way we want to get compensated. So that's my first triangle. That's how I would introduce a career framework for the listeners.
All right, thank you. Sami.
Fantastic. So my framework is a square. No, I'm just kidding. So I'm just trying to recollect my quote. I think it was something to the effect of, tell them nothing, show them everything, right? And really it was inspired, I know I put Ernest Hemingway there, just someone you may recognize, but it's actually inspired by my wife. So my wife's a journalist at the Star, and that's just their modus operandi. That's how they work, right? When you're reading the news, especially in print, they're really bringing to life the story for you. You see the movements, you see in the scenes kind of cut across, like in your mind, playing it out like a movie. And that's an art. It's an art form. So with respect to kind of the world of analytics and AI, if you can show individuals something, you kind of really bring it to life, and it just clicks, it resonates with them, it's so much more impactful than a list of metrics, just as an example, right? So that's kind of really the background behind my quote. So just by way of background, I actually went to school just around the corner, U of T, St. George campus, did computer science, software engineering. Similar to Pavel, he went to Big Blue IBM. I went to Accenture as a new graduate. Spent countless years there, about 15 or so years. And a little story, early in my career, on my very first project, it was actually with another bank, not the bank I'm currently working for. I was in a development role, so dating myself a little bit, building out SQL Server DTS ETL jobs, for those of you who are familiar with that. And really the purpose was to automate a series of financial steps and transformations to reconcile the books. So we're comparing the automated process with the manual entry kind of process that the accountants were working on. And it was a hard project because we couldn't get a version A and version B, the automated versus the manual, to reconcile. So I remember one night we were working really late and actually slept on the conference room floor overnight, and then had to wake up at 6:37 in the morning for the partner meeting just to provide an update on like how close are we within threshold to call this a success. We weren't there yet. And it was at that point, that was a very early career defining point for me, because that's when I started to ask these existential questions. Have I chosen the right career? Is this what I'm going to be doing on every consulting project? Am I in the right field of work? I should have taken that other job. But I knew at that point in time, if I got through that project, hopefully I'd be able to conquer successfully other subsequent kind of projects, and it worked out, right? So there's ups and downs, but fast forward a few years, had an opportunity to kind of lead up the technical and infrastructure architecture team at Presto, Smart Card for Transit. On day one, greenfielded, very different type of project. Spent some time working in enterprise architecture, IT strategy, digital strategy. So I've been fortunate enough to have a variety of experience across a few different areas, and eventually kind of fell into data and AI at Accenture. And then, recently I've been with the bank for about 7 or 8 months now, and the opportunity kind of came up, and I felt like this was something that I've been doing with multiple clients, different types of organizations, cross industry, and I can devote my energy and focus with one organization and really make a meaningful impact. So that's my story.
Awesome, thank you. Sam.
Cool. My name is Sam. I'm from Shopify. I couldn't get my code in because legal didn't approve my code in time.
What would it have been?
Good question. So it was actually hitting at the practitioner. And I'm a firm believer that we as data science practitioners have a huge social responsibility to shape sort of what our collective craft is capable of doing and what we're serving. So last year, actually at a conference, I gave a talk about how to design data privacy-friendly architecture, and the quote was designed to basically say, practitioners can't throw up their hands if our craft has taken us to a place where we're not comfortable, right? So we have an active role. in playing and shaping where we're heading in. If you didn't ask that question, I would have gone with a fun fact about myself.
Do it.
So in my early 20s, I used to ride a motorcycle. And I ended up actually racing motorcycles as well. And about 3 years ago, I sold my bike, becoming a family man and all. But I like to tell people I front-loaded the risk in my life very early. And that's playing out. Maybe it will in the future as well. So to talk about my journey a little bit and how I got to Shopify, I actually started at U of T as well. Did the engineering science program, and was really interested in sort of the mix of biology and engineering. So using our engineering principles in order to solve problems that we as humans are facing with our own anatomy. And that got me interested in sort of mixing electrical engineering principles to hit at some of the electrically inspired organs in the body, like the brain or the pancreas or the heart. And that led me to doing a master's program in a field that was trying to replicate the model of one thin slice of the brain in order to detect the onset of epilepsy, right? And I did that for a few years. And at the end of it, I really was looking for something with a faster feedback cycle, because the things that I was working on would have taken 10, 12 years before it ended up affecting anyone. And as I was looking to graduate, I was speaking to a friend of mine, about things that I would be interested in. And they actually suggested a company called iReturn Marketing that was looking for someone called a data scientist. And this was about 8 years ago, and my natural response was, what is a data scientist? And to which the hiring manager actually sent me a Harvard Business article saying the title was very provocative, the sexiest job of the 21st century, right? I'm still waiting for that to be true.
It's a good-looking room. I don't know. It's pretty good.
And that got me on the journey of becoming a data scientist. And I was with iReturn for about 2.5 years, and later joined Shopify. Been part of a few different teams for the 4 years I've been there, and currently leading 2 teams, one in the channels area, and also one in marketing automation. So really providing tools for small and medium-sized businesses in order to take advantage of the power of our platform in order to make their marketing choices smarter. And I'm also glad to be here. I think the organization, for being a fully volunteer body, has been fantastic. It's my first time here, hoping that I get a return invite as well.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. All right, Eric.
Hi, my name is Eric Bogart. So my quote is actually something that ties closely to my career history. So my quote is essentially paraphrasing myself, I guess. Never forget that you're solving a real-world problem. Otherwise, what you're doing is just math. And it might be fun, but it's just math. And that was something that was drilled into me by my management over the years. That's probably why I think of it so much. I'm very different than the other people on this panel. I was a different kind of engineer. I was an industrial and systems engineer, which is like way off the map now. But it's actually shaped my thinking a lot in the way I do analytics and the way I coach my team on analytics. And I look forward to sharing a little bit more detail about that later. My master's degree is in operations research as well, so another applied engineering discipline. Coming out of that, I joined Procter & Gamble. Both of those were actually, again, I'm super different. That was in the US at The Ohio State University. I joined out of school. I went to Procter & Gamble, and I joined after some reliability internship in the reliability engineering space. I actually joined a supply chain design group. It's a global consultancy helping consult on some of the biggest problems P&G had. Where do we locate facilities? How do we get our products to market? These are major, major decisions with huge cost implications for a big company. So my first project was to redesign the North America distribution network. It was like $1 billion of spending, and I was just out of school, right? So huge problem, meaningful impact on company results if we get it right or wrong. You can't just do math. You're solving a real world problem. You need to understand how it works. You need to understand, the assumption for whatever this cost in this facility is going to be, you have some ownership for what went into that, right? So you have to really start thinking carefully about, wow, if I'm owning this decision in some way, I also own all the things that went into the way I decided it, right? So first coaching moment for me, and actually Tom Davenport had collaborated a lot with my first boss at P&G, talking about P&G analytics. So I came up through a great organization to teach me sort of that problem-solving ethos, not just doing great models, right? I was with Procter & Gamble for about 10 years. I was fortunate to have a global career with them. So I very quickly found I really enjoyed the retail space, so how those products actually get sold to consumers. I worked on our Walmart team in Arkansas. I worked on our Safeway team in San Francisco. I led a analytics practice in Western Europe in Paris. I had a really awesome time traveling around the world doing analytics. I recommend it as part of the triangle model. I'll add where as a choice. Remember, you can always choose where together with those things.
A square is just two triangles.
Yeah, that's
so
true, right?
It works.
So I encourage you to, particularly when you have freedom to do it, take advantage of global opportunities. You will learn different ideas from different places in the same way that you learn different approaches and different strategies from different companies. So just always remember there's that degree of freedom. I moved to Toronto, joined Deloitte, really enjoyed doing analytics consulting, but actually was tempted into my role at ACOSTA. We are a very different kind of company. We're a business-to-business company, primarily working in the retail space. We do a lot of things that you will see the results of, but very few consumer sort of noticeable interactions. But we're in there making sure that the store is ready to sell the products that you're in there to buy. So helping to reinforce the store's own labor, but on behalf of clients. So we have a huge labor force. We have 20-some thousand people who go out and do this kind of work. We are a very different kind of way to do analytics, and I look forward to sort of saying how we think about it and what we're doing.
Awesome, we appreciate that. I think it really gives a good lens into the thoughts that you're going to share coming forward, so that helps a lot. So the discussion today is around scaled AI, and I would ask how many people right now, when we think about scalability, feel that at their workplace AI is being used in some way? In some ways. So yeah, a good amount of people in the room. We heard the stat earlier that only 4% of Canadians think that it's part of their lives, but a lot of people here recognize that it's already there. And so I'll share my quote a little bit later because it pertains to one of the questions, but in terms of the title, when friends hear that I'm Associate Director of a Master of Management in Artificial Intelligence, the first question they ask me is like, what does that mean? What do you do and what do you teach people? And so the best analogy I can come up with to simplify it for them is sort of, it reminds me of this joke. Does anyone know the comedian John Mulaney, if they're familiar? Yeah, John, he's good. Yeah, he's funny. So you'll like this. So he's got this joke, and it's about, he's kind of making fun of what it would be like to be a detective back in the 50s. And picture you walk into a crime scene, and there's a dead body, and there's blood all over the floor. And the detective says, "Look at all that blood. Gross. Mop it up. Now back to my hunch." And so it struck me that when you think about it, that's really how we've been doing business before data and AI. It was just like the oldest, most experienced person in the room would be like, this is what I think. And everyone would be like, okay, let's do that. So now, in this example, the blood is the data pool, and AI could be the tools that we use to extract the information from it. So having said that, you'd think every police force, once they figured out that you could do this, would hire detectives that could analyze the blood and help solve problems much quicker, more efficiently than just guessing and trying things. But it's not that easy, it turns out. It's not the case. So that's my first question is, in terms of the hype around AI and getting these new data scientists, the sexiest job, the new detectives, is it true? Are we at that place where we are 100% of the time able to scale this idea that we can use information and extract meaning from it to make decisions? So I have to go to the grid here. Pavel, you are A on this grid, so would like to hear your stories about what you think about this.
Yeah, give the consultant the most complex questions about the value schedules.
You're welcome.
I do want to, before we talk about that, one of the things that we all agree in this panel is this is one of those conferences where it's truly about practitioners' community development. I just wanted to make that point because I think at least the organizers and everybody here, we go to all kind of conferences with 10,000 people and that sort of thing. That's the purpose of this. So do feel free to continue to connect because you don't get enough opportunity for this, right? Just a polling question, how many of you are focused on large enterprises, whether as a consultant or as an employee in this room? Okay. Okay, cool. Because I think you know what I'm focused on enterprise as well. So when we talk about scaled AI, it'll be that part of the world. I think Sam can touch on the consumer space perhaps much better. Again, I kind of prepared you for my second triangle. So here's a second triangle. And you know the intent is we've been doing a lot of consulting work. We have about 120 people practice here. So we have sort of two camps of clients. Camp number one, what we call ad hoc data science, meaning lots of very interesting work around POCs and pilots, some even actually going into production and showing value. But that's not bulk of the clients. Clients are actually all in this sort of ad hoc data science space. And then there's a second group, what we're calling that the folks that have actually scaled advanced analytics or ML across the enterprise, across product lines, across geography. And there's a difference. There's a difference between the two. And to kind of coin a term, we're kind of calling it, there's a great wall of enterprise data science right in the middle. An organization needs to get over this wall. And as we see evidence from our engagements, so we kind of created this triangle to be able to explain this in a simple way. So at the top of the triangle is actually starts with digital leadership that actually willing to declare to the street that what is the value that they will create with digital and analytics. Now you might think that's very, you know, obvious, but I like to have a good challenge for you. Find out how many organizations actually declaring to the street that with digital technology, we will create X billion dollars worth of value by 2021, 2022. There's not that many. And that's because a CEO doesn't just do that, right? I mean, there's a big impact on your stocks when you do those kind of things and if you don't deliver. So what that shows is organizations just getting ready with leadership, with strategy that's holistic, and then apply analytics or data, how that would actually contribute as a bigger goal. So that is very key on the top of that triangle where the organization is actually ready to create value. Because a lot of time we don't talk about is what's the value schedule of this discussion, right? Why should we do this at all? So that's sort of the top. Then the second triangle is the internal organizations. And Sami and I will talk more about in the next question on this. The internal organization, some of the large enterprises is like a country. It's a marketplace on its own. You have central bodies, you have federated bodies in different line of businesses. And there's innovation teams, there's digital teams, there's data teams. How that whole ecosystem that's internal to an organization work itself out is a challenge on its own that one should figure out. And the third triangle that what we would suggest is a partner ecosystem. That's where, whether it's a consulting partners or technology providers, or startups that would exist in that partner ecosystem. Now, like everything else, the challenge is not these things individually. The challenge is when is it coming together for that organization, the leadership, the internal bodies, and the external bodies all lining up towards that value schedule that CEO just declared to the market. And I start there because I think we have a lot of things to talk about in terms of technology aspect of it. I will touch on that on the next question. But I wanted to frame the conversation in this triangle where digital leadership that's telling to the market how much value they will create by X number of years, internal organizations that are all lining up towards that and dealing with the politics of things, and then the external partners that are also lining up appropriately and providing the top talent necessary to accomplish that goal. So that's where I'll frame what I see from our humble experiences of projects which organizations are moving on from ad hoc data science to this scaled deployment, multiple use case, multiple product lines, multiple geography to get the value schedule going.
So a follow-up question for Pavel. What's your favorite shape? Okay, Sam.
There's something about triangles that gets me excited.
Sam, equilateral, isosceles, we'll talk about that later. All right, Sam, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. So for large organizations to be able to collect data and at a later time figure out the value, I think it's par for the course. They've been doing that actually for a long time. They also have the resources to invest in storing all these things. But the folks that we routinely run into, the 800,000 or so businesses on our platform, some of them large, don't get me wrong, but they don't typically have the resources to house this data and find value from it. So then to them, the question becomes, do we get better at operating our business or our core competency, or do we go out and find expertise in order to extract value from the data that we have? And that's a problem not only for the people that we routinely interact with, but if you think about all of the nonprofits, the charities that are out there, they're actually burdened by the data that they've collected. With new rules such as GDPR and CCPA in California, the cost of data to some people is actually negative, which is mind-blowing. So for those people to extract value from data, they're actually trying to keep the lights on and not get sued because of the data that they have, right? So there's actually a huge spectrum of people, and all of them, in the end, have collected data with the hopes of actually extracting value from it, making it operationally better, giving them direction for future projects, right? And for the scale of people, they obviously have different resources available to them in order to extract this value. And not all of them have actually, to use Pavel's words, operationalized or put this model into production, right? Even at these large organizations that many of you actually raised your hand for, so many models are actually housed in people's laptops, right? Get passed through in emails, the results of it. And in order to actually extract value and have it be a routine part of a normal business operations, you do need to end up operationalizing it. And we at Shopify provide some tools. We leverage the platform, the data that we see across the platform in order to provide tools for people in order to bridge the gap. Because in many cases, they're actually competing in the same market against people that have buildings full of people that are looking to extract value from it. So we're in the business of democratizing it and also actually implementing rules or policies that actually prevent them from regulatory liabilities such as GDPR and things like that. So I think the extracting value from data, I think we're still in the early days, right? When I was writing MapReduce jobs in the past, I thought that was the early days. And having seen this field evolve for 7 years, I still feel like it's the early days. We're still trying to figure out fundamentally how our relationship with data is going to be. As the cost of storage goes down, as the cost of compute goes down, I think more and more people are asking the questions, how can we operationalize this and actually put a dollar figure, to Pavel's point, on what is the value of the data that we're housing. So I feel like we're still in the early days, but great science ahead. And I think you've seen two perspectives from the whole spectrum of companies that are hoping to do so.
Pavel, you have a question for Sam, follow-up?
Because you brought up a very good point around the cost of data. I want to know your view, because I think there is, these are not laws yet, but there's a proposal in US, particularly for 100 million plus consumer platforms. And to be honest, I don't know where Shopify at, but I'm sure it's close. Every Google user, so the proposal is Google has to disclose the value of Pavel, Sami, and Sam individually, the value of our data. Like that's what the law is being discussed. So I just wonder, to your point around the cost of these business owners, right? So if you start to put your data and that kind of regulations come along that, hey, you need to declare how are you monetizing your users' data. What is Shopify, or are you guys thinking about those sort of things?
Are we thinking about it? Absolutely, right? And the compliance burden of data, I think we're starting to see that round out more and more. It was started by EU, and it was deliberated for many, many years, even before it came into law. And California now taking a stand to do something similar. The idea that the exchange of value is to be transparent is, I think, core to many of these laws that we're seeing, right? For example, if I'm on a social media website and I am connecting with my friends, what is the value of that interaction to the platform? Now, does that change my behavior? Quite likely, right? And my rights as a user of that platform being transparent so that I can opt into it with the full knowledge of what is going on. I think there's a case to be made that I have that right. Now, to flip that on the other side to these companies that have made lots of money with this data and have found a great way to monetize data, really setting the trend for many of the algorithms that we have available that are helping out the rest of us. What is their compliance burden, and is it fair, right? I think we as a society have to deal with that, right? Because laws are there in order to reflect sort of the collective consciousness of the society. And if we say big businesses are in a position to handle this, let them go out and do it, then so be it. But I think once it does become law, as companies, we have the responsibility to figure out ways and to help each other to actually be compliant, right? If you think about it, like the compliance burdens, there hasn't been a very good open source solution to being compliant for GDPR, which to me is strange because it affects so many people. And that to me is a sign that we're still trying to get our heads around what it fundamentally means with how we organize our data. And I think in the next few years, we might actually see some neat things coming out.
Well, the $5 billion Facebook fine last week might get a lot of people towards what you're saying.
Yeah, that might get a lot of people at the top of your pyramid line for sure.
Yeah. We have a question over here. If we can get a mic right over there, if possible. Oh, there's one coming. Oh, it's on that side, actually. Sorry, making you run over here. That's why they call it a mic runner.
Thank you. So exchanging the value of data and organizing the data are very interesting concepts. But prior to that is a more fundamental question on who owns that data. What is your point of view on that, and how do you think it is evolving in Canada?
Is that question for Sam? Or any?
Sam and rest of the panel.
Yeah, okay. Anyone want to jump on it?
Maybe I can get it started. So on our platform, and I can talk about Shopify as I'm most familiar with our platform. We have merchants that use our platform in order to sell to their buyers, right? So there are actually two entities. There's the merchant that is using our platform, and there's the buyer who is fundamentally choosing to have a relationship with the merchant, right? So in that case, Shopify collects data on both the merchant and the buyer, right? If someone checks out on our platform, we collect that information for the mere fact that we need to process that transaction. But our policy is the merchant's data we can use to improve our platform, but the buyer data actually belongs to the merchant. And we actually give them tools in order to be compliant with rules like GDPR when their buyers contact them in order to forget all information about them or give them a brain dump of all of the data that the platform has collected about that buyer.
Anybody else want to say anything?
We have a lot to say, but we'll keep going
Okay.
here. We'll come back to that point.
Okay, sounds good. So for the second question that we want to move to, so everyone who put their hand up, put their hand back up if you said you think you're using AI in some way at your enterprise. All right, keep your hand up if you think you're doing it very well. It's okay, people can't see you. It's just us. Only we know. Who said it? So the next question then is, with the challenges around doing this, what are the ecosystems that allow this to happen really well? And inversely, what are the ecosystems or situations in which we're really blocking the progress of this? And so, Sami, we'll get your thoughts on this.
Sure. So, in terms of doing it really well, so I'm a bit of a cynic, and members from my team in BMO might cringe a little bit when I say this, but I think with respect to large organizations, I think they're largely dysfunctional in this space, right? Within kind of enterprise data analytics and AI, I think there's so much room for growth, so much room for improvement. A lot of the work that's happened up until now around kind of big data and establishing common sets of data, common infrastructure, a lot of it, at least in banking from my perspective, originated from regulatory requirements, right? So AML, Basel, et cetera. And that drove a certain type of behavior, certain type of funding on specific types of assets being built out. But it's a bit of a Swiss cheese that's resulted, right? And there's a lot of gaps that we need to close. So, really, it's a journey to get into kind of that better ecosystem model, the more modernized model that kind of you're referring to, Rishi. And there are a lot of symptoms of the issues today, from like low adoption of a lot of the data and AI services that the enterprise provides, to infrastructure issues that pop up, to a lack of ROI associated with significant investments. I can continue, but at the end of the day, what does it hold you back from? It holds you back from going to market quickly with new insights that can help the customer, or could reduce or mitigate risk, improve revenue, reduce cost, et cetera. So that's kind of the constraint, the challenge, right? And I'm hitting a lot of challenges, like in this role as well, as are, I'm sure, many of you within your respective corporations. Sometimes I feel like I'm Frodo Baggins, like traversing through Middle Earth, hitting challenge after challenge after challenge. But I think the important thing to remember, because this whole story is a journey, is that you got to lock in your victories, right? You just one battle, lock it in, build that momentum, and don't slow down, right? Because it's actually not easy. I'd be, painting a very rosy picture if I said this journey to kind of advancement in AI was really simple. It's actually not very straightforward. It's a bit of a winding adventure. So what can you do about it, right? There's a few things that I've tried to implement in recent months, really kind of boiling it down to three things, right? Align, accelerate, and then sustain, right? So alignment is really coming down to top-down sponsorship and advocacy from senior leaders within the organization around kind of this is our mission, our vision, where we're headed. We actually refreshed just a few months ago rather, our data and AI strategy across the bank, across all groups, across functions. That really helps because you can then cascade that message down to the working levels. That improves collaboration. I'm not banging my head against the wall when I'm dealing with certain groups anymore, because both leaders have kind of cascaded the same message down. So that strategic alignment is absolutely imperative, and that really talks to a lot of the operating model issues that you need to solve. Related to that is actually funding model. So funding, especially within a large company, drives behaviors, right? So we're starting to shift towards more of a kind of a hybrid funding model, where it's not just business unit funded, but it's a combination of business unit funded, but potentially some enterprise kind of persistent funding, just to strike the right balance, so that when you're delivering a project with various teams, be it commercial or wealth management or risk or AML, whomever, within a banking context, they get what they need, but then others can start benefiting that because you start to build some reusable capabilities on the back of those projects. The second, as I mentioned, is around acceleration, right? So I talked about kind of locking in those wins, locking in those victories. So take that MVP approach tied to your kind of top use cases, right? Some organizations call it kind of the value lab approach or the MVP approach. The key point is, fail fast, fail forward, take that agile approach and prove something very quickly, whether it's a technique or it's a specific business case that you want to substantiate. whatever it may be, get into that type of rhythm. And it's surprising how this isn't like prolific across a lot of organizations, still very much of a big bang approach versus kind of what I'm used to. But taking that approach is really conducive to great results. And then you can work with your engineering and your production support teams to kind of get into production and sustain it. Which brings me to my third point, which is sustainability, right? If I put myself in the role, in the seat of the actual business stakeholder, because I'm an enterprise function right now, what do they want? They want kind of consistent, reliable services, right? From a data and AI perspective. So what does that mean? They want SLAs. They want you to be able to meet those. They want a positive customer experience. So there are things you can do around kind of measuring the internal employee NPS around kind of what you're launching. They want a kind of ongoing support. They want a community through which they can kind of share ideas and exchange what's working, what's not working. And then you need to kind of really tap into that to be able to kind of constantly improve your product roadmap or the offers that you and services that you kind of deploy within the organization. So really, I found a lot of success in the past, and we're trying to do the same here in terms of the transformation around kind of implementing these three things at a very high level.
I just want to point out, too, that now we have Frodo and Sam here on stage. So
that's right.
good.
Samwise Gamgee. All right.
Yeah, you knew
So
there'd be a
sitting
Lord of
next
the
to each
Rings
other.
reference at a data AI conference. Okay, Pavel, do you have some thoughts from IBM on the same thing? Or maybe even an example? I mean, you said you were a cynic, but can you talk about an example of when this really goes horribly wrong?
I'm going to reframe your question to basically what Sami was saying. I think we talked about that triangle concept where business sponsorship and value schedule upfront declared, so that everybody's working towards that. Internal organizations figuring out their roles, and the external organizations and how they all play ball. One example that I'd like to provide here is a little bit on the technical side. What is the difference between ad hoc data science with scaled solutions that goes across use cases, geographies, and products? Just a quick poll. How many of you are, you consider yourself to be more on the mathematics side of the analytics game? Okay. How many of you consider more of the developers, like, application developers side of the analytics game? And how many of you consider yourself, sort of let's call it the management translators side of the world? Well, this is primarily a management analytics crew, so that's kind of probably expected. Like 80% of the hands were on the management analytics, or 60%, that sort of thing. What's interesting, and I kind of want to make the point, is that data scientists are not application developers. And that's a fundamental difference for ad hoc data science and scaled AI. In the scaled AI, there's three components. One is actionability, meaning are you building something that your users can actually take an action on? And there's lots of details there, but that's sort of actionability. The second one is reusability. That's what, to Sami's point, how do you continue to reuse components of your solution in other aspects of a problem? And the third would be scalability. How do you scale in hybrid cloud environments with different types of containers and all those sort of things? And I think as a community, because we are here to develop the management analytics community, we need to understand what we are good at individually or our teams and what we are not, right? Because until we actually recognize that, we will not be able to scale these solutions across the enterprise. So I just wanted to add that to what Sami was saying around those, because we just need to understand that scaling analytics is not just the mathematician's or the physicist's job. It requires software development as a core profession.
Well, thank you. And so the idea of the data scientist, last year one of the panelists made a joke that open source and out of the box is going to get rid of the need for the sexiest job of the 21st century. So what are your thoughts on that, of the state of the new tech, it being more accessible? And Eric, maybe we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, this is interesting. I mean, the thing that I keep seeing is that the things that are automating, they're automating the mundane bits of the jobs, right? So a great example, I think Power BI in like February introduced a module that looks for causal relationships or highly correlated things. I think they call it driver analysis. before that would have been a data scientist maybe building a table that looks for the driver relationships. Now we have to give that to a visualization developer to make the thing on top of it. There's ETL that happens. Like there's a lot of work that goes into something that's now just a visual in the visualization tool. Cool, right? Like now that business analyst can focus on looking at the drivers, and the ETL developers go do something harder, and the data scientists go work on something harder. And I think this is kind of fundamentally the way I see this happening is both commercial and open source tools are solving a lot of the less difficult, less judgment-driven problems to let people focus on the judgment-driven, thoughtful, context-aware, like the things that are less mechanical, frankly. And the things that are, you know, it might require some expertise, but that expertise can be scaled. I see it being sorted out really well. So at least from my point of view, like those things are great and they're helpful, but they're not disruptive in the way that I think we're all sort of concerned. Like, what is the disruptive thing coming to take all of our interesting work away from us? Like, I just don't see it happening in such a disruptive way. I think it's happening progressively with something that was originally like, oh, cool, let's build a driver analysis here. And like a team gets together and figures out how to do it. And then it's sort of a standard enough thing that the software will do it, but we've long moved on from that, right? So that I just sort of see these things as being the natural carving off of what was originally sort of an interesting progressive idea, becomes a norm, becomes an expectation, becomes part of a client tool.
So it's actually making work more interesting.
Fundamentally,
overall.
I think it does.
Yeah, more meaningful.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sam, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no one that's written ETL pipelines is going to complain.
Who's written ETL pipelines here? I have not done that.
So to just touch on what Eric mentioned. So these new tools coming out are a natural progression of how we're heading into tackling deeper and deeper problems and more interesting problems. So on our teams, we'd ideally like to have tools that would automate sort of answering of the what, sort of answering of the whys, so that we can build tools that actually fundamentally understand consumer behaviors. And if we hope to change them, work on problems that allow consumer behaviors to be changed. That fundamentally is a more interesting, deeper problems that we as humans on a fundamental level really resonate with. So that's, you know, one element of all of these new tools being available. The second element is not all organizations that want to make data a part of their operational strategy have access to teams of people that are going to enable them to do so. So these tools being open source, these tools being very accessible, easy to use, less expertise to use it correctly, means that more people will be involved in actually extracting value from data that organizations have. And as I mentioned earlier, these companies without a lot of cash in the bank can now do so, right? So think about our cities, our sort of not-profit institutions being able to operate with data at the same efficiency as some of the large organizations. That would certainly make, you know, what's going on with the TTC, what's going on with the LRT, all of those things so much better, right? And that fundamentally makes us as a society better, which is really awesome to see. The day where I don't have to build ETLs will be likely the happiest day career-wise in my life.
Well, one of the ideas is that as you stop having to do that, you can focus more on strategy. And so actually my quote that I provided for the conference was, and this is something that our director, Steve Thomas, or Uncle Steve, as some of you know him as, who've been taught by him, have talked about, is that people think, oh, I need an AI strategy. And so my quote was, you don't need an AI strategy, you need AI and analytics to continually inform your overall business strategy. And so my background is design thinking, innovation, and I found it funny during that revolution that was happening, where they would send students out or people or employees, all of this entrepreneurship, go learn the principles. They're like, okay, you learned design thinking, now come back and let's do what we were doing before. Now we have the accreditation of design thinkers, when really design thinking, or what we're talking about with AI and analytics, in my opinion, should fundamentally change your strategy in terms of how you approach it, in this case, inform it. So Eric, what are your thoughts on that and the role that strategy and data are playing with each other now?
Yeah, I'm strongly biased here. I actually took my role at my current company because I believed so strongly that my role was situated in the right business group. So advanced analytics at my company reports into the strategy function. So why does that matter? Like we talked about budgets and funding, right? Well, one of the things that meant to me is that our company is making a big strategic bet on advanced analytics, right? If I reported into a line of business or into IT, I am a part of someone's world that, like IT needs to deliver some AI, let's get it done, right? But if fundamentally our chief strategy officer is thinking about advanced analytics, that's an organization that will be successful using analytics, right? So that's kind of my first point is thinking even about where analytics is accountable to in a company will help give you a hint of the degree to which it's in the strategy. The second point is it's not, I think you're right, it's not healthy to have an AI strategy. Your company, and I think of it in, I'm gonna make a triangle out of this, why not? I think of it in a triangle. You can change what you're doing, you're changing how you're doing it, and you can change the value of what you're doing. And those are kind of the three dimensions where I think strategy adapts with AI, right? So I can do something I never used to do before with AI. Cool, that's a what change. How, right? I used to throw 1,000 darts a day and 10 of them would work, right? Now I'm gonna choose those darts differently and I get a better yield, right? So I'm going to change my processes and how I do them. I'm going to make better bets every day, right? And then the last one is the value. If those 10 darts still are my only darts, but I get a lot better and each one returns more, all of those are really big strategic differences in the company. I think we'll talk a little bit about it in another question, but these are things that unless you're getting that kind of line into your senior leadership to help shape those what, how, and value discussions, the strategy is going to sort of work in spite of AI or in spite of analytics. It won't be in concert with it.
And,
right?
and often, I mean, you represent some senior leadership, but often would you say senior leadership is the ones who know the least about what this means?
Often, right? Like a lot of the excitement around what these kinds of capabilities will do is the line manager who's trying to get the right rep to the right job on the right timing, right? So it's also, you end up in a role like some of us have, being that direct line for like, hey, did you know that we can really change this part of the company over here? Because they're probably not gonna talk to you about it, but they're asking me the right questions. And I think we need to kind of carve this off as a big opportunity. And I find that particularly exciting, right? If you're the analytics translator in the room, you get to play that connector role and really help, infuse some interesting and fresh thinking into business.
Yeah, I think you used that word translator. And so I know that we as a school, that's where we're looking to position people, because you can be the person that speaks the language on both ends, and that's so rare and so valuable. And so one of the things we're focusing on is that actual communication of it. Like, how do you present this idea in layman's terms with impact to someone who goes, oh, I get how this changes what we're gonna do. So Sami, what do you think about this discussion that we're having on strategy?
I think it's a great discussion. I was, like the build on the triangle metaphor as well. So I'm a big fan of kind of what you said, the quote, your quote in particular around, it's not about having an AI strategy, it's about making sure you're accelerating the business, right? With that AI strategy. So from my perspective, those two have to go hand in hand, right? So with any business strategy, you need to make sure you understand the value that analytics and AI bring to the table. And I think companies are starting to invest in this area, whether in terms of organization, kind of where these functions sit. I mean, that can vary for various reasons, but as long as kind of top down, they're aligned that this is something that can help accelerate our business growth. And I know in my market, within financial services, within Canada as well as North America, like it's a hyper competitive market, right? So from that perspective, what can you do to help kind of meet the bogey? Like there's some really aggressive multi-year goals that we need to face. I think there's recognition now that analytics and AI can truly kind of help move the needle. And not to knock on a lot of the existing analytics that's done, like, picking on, targeting and personalization, cross-sell, upsell. Those are fantastic and they need to continue to be done, but they'll make incremental changes, incremental benefits. Really where I see more value, if you have a concerted strategy, is around, we call them like non-linear opportunities. What do I mean? Specifically, these are opportunities that are much bigger, much more complicated, and require an orchestration of a multitude of capabilities and teams to come together, right? Everyone from the data science team to the business team to the technology team to the digital team. that's when you can start to kind of move the needle a lot more aggressively and kind of reach your multi-year goals. Like an example of something that we're doing is we're building a brain, right? We're building a brain to detect the intent of, Pavel, when you call into the call center, we know why you're calling. Before you even say anything, don't press 1 to choose this, 2 to choose that. We know why you're calling, right? So that's a harder problem to solve, looking at kind of cross-channel data, the traversals between channels, your interactions, your demographics, your product holdings, loyalty, sentiment, pulling that all together and being able to execute on something like that in a real time has a huge business case, right? You're reducing call deflection, you're improving call deflection as well as call avoidance by being able to kind of proactively reach out to those customers. So it's a no-brainer, but to be able to pull that off requires different parts of the organization to come together, from the channels team to linguists to experience designers to UI designers to the data science team to the engineering team. And that's where more of a top-down strategic view allows and mandate allows you to kind of pull those types of teams together with the right budget to execute on what's really going to competitively differentiate you.
Yeah. Pavel, what are your thoughts? And why are you calling into the call center at BMO also?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
All my money's at TD. You're gonna have to convince me I have to move that money first.
Okay, we'll have to talk afterwards.
I just wanted to make a point here again to kind of emphasize this is a management analytics community development. This is what this conference is about. That's how I see it. I think that's how some of my friends see it. We do not need to take responsibility of model explainability. Okay, that's another community that's working on it. That's their expertise. We may also not need to take responsibility for all the technical innovation that's going on and all kind of cloud and quantum and that sort of space. But we, in this room, we must take responsibility of what Eric mentioned about strategy and how analytics will contribute to that strategy. We must talk to our bosses or our leadership in our organization to get that point through. That is this community's responsibility. Like we get to be part of the AI community when we take this management analytics responsibility to get this message that perhaps analytics organizations, they don't have to fully belong to the strategy organization, should be very tied to it. And I just wanted to make this point because it might sound obvious, and I know Queens and Rotman and Schulich has this great management analytics programs to deal with this issue, but this is an issue at the board level, this is an issue at a C-suite, but this is also an opportunity, to be honest with you, for all of these folks' career progression, right? So I think it's a challenge and opportunity. I just want to make that point that that's the problem that we cannot hide from. We have to deal with it.
I think that's a great point. These are all the spider men and spider women out there. With great power comes great responsibility, you guys. It's up to you. Okay, so we want to leave some time for questions as well here. We've had a great discussion. So the same thing with the mic runners. If anyone has a question right now, put up your hand and we'll get to a couple of your questions. Over here, we've got one over here. Yeah, leave your hand up so they can find you.
Hi, John Chen from Loyalty One here. So we know, I guess this question is mainly for Pavel, but I guess Sam could also chip in. So we know the big tech companies, they all have their own like machine learning platforms, like SageMaker, Azure, Google Cloud. I kind of want to bring it back to the open source question. Where do you kind of see, I guess, like open source interacting with these existing enterprise solutions, and also even like new emerging ones like the one at Shopify that Sam was talking about? Thanks.
Don't know if you missed the news. We made a big bet on open source by buying Red Hat, particularly on the OpenShift containers and all this sort of stuff. To respect the time, I think big technology providers, whether it's Google, IBM, Microsoft, I think we are all fundamentally do believe in open source. Everybody has their own take on it. I think there's different strategy, different players are playing. From an IBM perspective, one of the sort of strategy we're executing on from a data, the creator of the data owns the data. And that, again, sounds simple, but that's actually part of our the way we developing products or go to market or engage with our clients. What we bring to a client and what we leave when we leave the client is very clear cut for us, because that is a guiding principle in every engagement. But to your questions around open source, at least from an IBM perspective, we are a big believer of it. All of our engagements that we are with our clients, we're working on Python and most of the open source technology. We will obviously have proprietary. IBM, as a other organization, is a for-profit. We're not shy away from that. We will make money with proprietary IP when it makes sense, but it doesn't mean that you don't contribute and embrace the open source environment.
Sam, yeah, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think the shift towards actually collecting data and a lot of the walled gardens that we're noticing is actually pointing to the fact that the tools that you use to extract value is actually available in the open source, right? So it's using these tools combined with the proprietary data that you have is how you're able to extract value. So the things that we see with all of the big cloud providers is actually leveraging a lot of the open source tools that are out there and making it really, really easy to use, right? Where you're not paying for sort of making use of open source software, but you're paying for sort of the compute power and the storage, et cetera. So that is really exciting because the cost to get started is getting lower and lower. And you can use the data that you have available in order to extract value. So this trend actually was surprising. Like someone that was in this community even 15 years ago could not have seen this future that we're right now living in. So it's a very exciting time. And I think more and more companies are actually using the fact that they participate in open source softwares as a way to attract people with this type of mindset to their organizations. So if you take a look at what Uber and Airbnb and Shopify does, fundamentally working on an open source project becomes part of the job description, which is really exciting for people that are technically minded.
And I just want to add from the education perspective too, in our programs we made the choice to go to open source. So we're coding in Python because that's also what you're using in the industry. So it's interesting to see how it's affected what is being taught in the schools even, and that I think is going to become the new norm. So Eric, you wanted to say something with that.
Yeah, something that I've kind of observed and a big differentiator. It seems like almost every major contributor to open source, that group is a basic research group that sits apart from the commercialized pieces of those businesses. So for example, Google they have algorithmists over here building clever things separate from the Google Cloud team that is selling solutions built on those things. Another great example is like Microsoft. They have Microsoft Research inventing things, and then they have Cortana, which are or cognitive services, where they've built a solution to a particular problem, which may embed some of that information or some of those algorithms. But something that I find actually really exciting in this community is almost no one is competing on the algorithm. The algorithm is sort of shared because it's built on these sort of progressive iterative advancements from everyone. But then the solutions, like I'm going to solve a particular problem better, easier, common across a lot of people. I'll sell you that, but the Lego block that I'm building on, that's everybody's, right? And I think that's actually really cool in this community.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, we're going to go to another question. Do we have multiple here? I'd like to get a question if we have a female participant asking. We've had, the men are talking way too much up here already. Yeah, so down here, I think.
Hello?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I guess more to the yeah, I'm over here.
Oh, wait,
Yeah.
no, I'm trying to get someone else. So I don't know you, but I'm not meaning to be rude, but
Stephen, we'll come back
I'm trying to
you.
get we'll come back to you. We'll talk to you after. Bring some diversity in. I can't tell if you're an old white man back there or not, sorry. I'm just kidding. You can use the Face app and find out. Okay.
Hi, panelists. My name is Joyce, and I work in consulting. My question has to do with something that I see with a lot of our clients. Whenever we talk about AI and analytics, they're always interested, but they see it as something they might implement 5 or 10 years down the line. And then it's only really when their competitor starts building something, then do they frantically scramble to do something similar. So how do we build more urgency in Canadian businesses to drive towards AI and analytics?
I'd actually love to speak to that. I'm in a company now where a lot of the people who sell our services would never be comfortable selling AI. But we get competed with by companies who are purely started to sell an AI solution to a problem we can solve. And so it's an interesting thing, like what you're talking to, that hesitance to do something until there's a competitive pressure to do it, that may not have anything to do with believing in whether or not you can deliver on the thing, right? In some cases, it's we don't have a person to go out and sell the thing, so I can't get anything back for it because I can't sell it yet. So I think we have to dig in a little more to understand those barriers. Is it believing in the promise of it, right? You can solve that with a POC. Like, let's prove that we can actually do the thing we say. Is it that it's not commercializable? Okay, well, do we know what the requirements would be? Like, are those solvable, or is that like a culture existential thing? Like, we have to solve it in a big way. But yeah, I just challenge, it's hard to be bold without knowing the thing that's keeping you back from being bold, right? So if you're a single purpose startup, you solve this one problem really well, you know your reason for being, it's to solve that problem. If you're trying to do something like your competitor hasn't done yet, you don't know that you need to be bold in this space yet. So I think it's a little bit of helping to lead people to good decisions, but it comes from empathy with those people to understand they have a really good reason why they're not excited, right? It's not that they don't like technology, it's not that they're afraid of, some irrational thing. They have a reason why that's not their biggest priority. So I just encourage this room, back to Pavel's point on community, like, we need to be empathetic, right? We can't just be visionaries without, like, we'll dust you all, leave you behind, yeah. Like, no one's better off that way, right? So why is it, what is it, and are those solvable things? Because ultimately the right thing may be exactly what they're choosing, but we need to understand why they're choosing it.
Mm-hmm. Pavel, I see you chomping at the bit.
Well, I mean, Joyce, which consulting firm you work for? Okay, I'm just trying to figure out who I'm helping.
Yeah.
I would just say, without all jokes aside, again, as a consultant, lifer, it's not necessary that we have the right client for analytics. Because I would argue half our clients, with all due respect to them, they're not ready to buy analytics from consulting services. Because if the leadership is not there, what is it you and I are going to do, right? So perhaps it's education is what they perhaps need. And when I'm talking about this, I'm talking at the top of the food chain. If the CEO is not declaring his intent of applying data and analytics to create a value, well, we're not there yet, right? So we need some work to do to kind of get there, perhaps including leadership changes. And we have seen that in many, many organizations where folks that are coming in to become the CEO in training has no industry experience in that, but they're getting groomed for that role, and they're the one that's going to make that big bet. So, as consultants who make a living by selling our hours, we should think about, is this the right client for analytics? Because the answer might be no.
And I want to weigh in on that a little bit with a perspective of, we're talking about enterprise here, but 80% of the market is made up of small to medium-sized businesses. And so I come from a family business background. My brother is here as well. We've both worked in that area. So let's say 200 to 300 employees. And how do you get those businesses to start adopting AI? And because I think this is one of those things, if I go back to my detective comment, like, we are going to leave people in the dust. Like, if the biggest businesses are operating with the most intelligence, how does the rest of the market compete? And so I don't necessarily have an answer to that, but that's just the question I put out there, is how do we bring this, how do we democratize this as well so that it's accessible and understandable to the SMEs that make up the majority of our market, who eventually, some of them, or the startups, will become the next giant corporations at some point. And we want to create an environment in which that can happen in Canada. Who will be the next unicorn, and we've had success, but how do we keep doing that? So that being said, I want to, Sami, did you want to weigh in on
I
that?
just wanted to
Yeah, go ahead.
mention one thing just to that question, which is around, I think a lot of it has to do with building a level of comfort, right? And how do you develop that level of comfort? I think a big part of it is just experimenting, right? Getting some level of exposure with the tools, with the techniques, with the open source kind of cloud-based kind of APIs, toolkits, services that exist there. So encouraging that type of behavior, even within your own team, as kind of like side kind of project, kind of skunk works, kind of not funded with major dollars, that builds comfort. Build something, show it, and then you can start to actually kind of build momentum. I found that to work quite well. As I mentioned earlier, we are an enterprise function within enterprise data and AI, and we'll go to certain lines of business and they're ready, and we'll go to other lines of business like, no, our business is doing really well. We don't need analytics and AI right now. Why would I even bother spending an ounce of energy or a minute of time on that? And that's totally fine. For those that are ready, that's where we'll invest our time. Just like, from a consulting perspective, like those are the clients that you want to kind of go after, if you will. And that's where we'll demonstrate results. And then what I'm hoping is, a year, 2 years down the line, those that weren't ready will have a bit of the FOMO effect and be like, okay, I want a piece of that action as well, right? Like this sounds good, it's proven, it's well established at this point. How do I get on board? So it comes down to readiness and comfort.
Thanks for your question, Joy. So we've got about 5 minutes left. So what I want to do, we've talked a lot about a lot of things, triangles, squares, Lord of the Rings, Spider-Man. I'd like to give each of you a chance to kind of put a bow from your perspective on the conversation we've had thus far, and kind of leave the audience with your final thoughts. So Eric, why don't we start with you over there?
Sure. I was talking to Mike Branch before this session, and I told him I was really mad he talked about linear regression models before I got a chance to. My inspiring message is like there's a whole lot of linear regression model problems that we need to go out and solve before we get to deep learning problems, explainability, things that are like well outside our control scope anyway, probably, right? And as analytics translators, there's almost nothing that's going to be out of our reach with a linear model and a good understanding of a business problem. And I think we all just kind of need to leave here starting there. This panel is about scaled AI, but scaled AI starts with understanding problems, solving them, and building to something that can work in bigger and bigger ways. So like remember simple tools and a good problem understanding, like that's going to get you as far as almost anything we talk about today. Go out there and learn the problems, try things, and move on and move up. And that's the only piece of advice I would give. There's a lot of cool stuff that's happening around us, but you can get a lot done personally with just those tools.
And to echo that, there's actually, the time that we live in is really exciting for our craft. And the fact that the tools are getting better and they're becoming more accessible means that we can apply our craft in more areas. And something Pavel touched on, our world is changing very quickly. And our ability to adapt using our tools is going to keep us relevant in the organizations that we're supporting. But fundamentally, all of these things, like algorithms, open source, containers, all of these are tools. And if we start getting excited about tools, but not how we're applying them to real problems or coming up with actionable insights, then really all we have are tools that aren't very useful. So I'd say focus on the problems and start simple for sure. And in terms of tools, we have a host of them available to us, but we need to keep changing. But the main focus needs to be the problem that we're solving and how we're extracting value, actionable value from the data that we have available.
Just, there's a few ideas, but just picking up on the data piece, I guess my final message would be get dirty in the data, right? I mean, in most of our roles, 80 to 90% of it is going to be kind of wrangling the data, engineering features, cleaning it up. It's not the sexy stuff, but it really helps develop an appreciation for the business context and kind of the underlying data sets that are going to power any type of AI that you're going to do. So that's one thing. And the other thing that you mentioned, Sam, is around community. I think here in Toronto, in Montreal, Edmonton, Calgary, I think we're in a a very privileged position actually in this era of AI, where we can walk down the street and there's various kind of AI powered companies. There's meetups around the place. There's all sorts of events. There's like a true ecosystem here. Get plugged in. This is one way of doing it within ABD, but there's several other venues as well. Just stay connected, talk to other practitioners, share ideas. That's how I get a lot of my learning beyond reading white papers and articles on Twitter and whatnot. But I think that's a big part of the learning that I have and want to share with you as well.
What else can I say that might be interesting than what my colleagues here said already? Maybe this is the homework for ABD 2020, which is if we work for organizations that truly says we want to be data-informed enterprises and we see data as an asset, ask as many leaders as possible in that organization, when will we put that data on a financial statement? You should get 3 groups of people. Group number 1, what are you talking about? Well, we need some education with that group. Group number 2, it's not possible, Pavel. The accounting principles are from 1930s. That's actually a good group to work with because at least we recognize this got to be an asset. And then there's a very minority, 5 to 10% group number 3, where we are doing this already and we want to be very ethically compliant to that aspect. We want to declare our ethical value upfront. How would we monetize it and put it on a financial statement? I just wanted to leave that with you because I think that is something for the next 10 or 15 years for us to figure out. And I hope that is as exciting for you as exciting for me.
And I just want to close by sharing the excitement of what's happening. I mean, we're in the education space. We see people excited to get into a career in this space. We see them look to people like you who are making their way and doing amazing, cool things. And I think when we talk to our students, one of the things we say is, you are legitimately going to do things no one's ever done before. And not everyone can say that. And so we've been lucky to share our thoughts up here today and hear from you. But the real excitement is in the future, who's going to sit there. And Sam, you'll probably get invited back. I think you did a good job. But it'll be some of you sitting here next year, and we really look forward to that. And I just want to thank all the panelists and most importantly the audience for sharing this time with us today. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that.